Hi, I'm Lauren from the Pikes Peak Library District, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about quilling. Now, for those of you who don't know, quilling is a type of paper crafting where you quill up little strips of paper into these really small designs, and then you can use them for all sorts of things, for scrapbooking, for card making, for things to hang on your walls. It's a really cool style of paper crafting that you can do, and it's easy to get started with. So today we're just going to go through some of the basic supplies you would need to get started quilling, and then the core quilling shapes that you use to build up designs. After that, I'll give you some resources that you can use to learn more about quilling, and some starter projects that you could use as you test out your new skills. So let's go ahead and go through our supplies. Quilling is really easy to get started with. All you really need are a quilling tool of some sort. This one that I'm holding is called a slotted tool, and it's called that because this little bit at the top, it actually has a split down the middle so that you can poke a piece of paper in between that little, those two pieces of metal, and it makes it really easy to roll the paper into the shapes that we're doing. So that's a great tool to start with if you're a beginner. There's also another style of tool called a needle tool, and you can use that. It doesn't have the split in the middle, you just kind of have to carefully get the paper started around the tip of the needle. So that one's a little bit more difficult to start with. The main difference is that the slotted tool will leave a very slight crimp in the paper right where you start at the middle of your coil, whereas the needle tool leaves a much more subtle mark on it, so it's a little bit less visible that you have rolled it yourself. So that's the main difference there. And there are a few different types of slotted tools. This one is more of a standard size, but there is an ultra fine slotted tool that has a very, very tiny opening, and it makes the crimp that it leaves a little bit more subtle. So those are some of the options for getting started. And you don't necessarily have to purchase a tool. You could also, for example, poke a needle into some cork or into an eraser. You could use, if you were making bigger coils that have a large hole in the middle, you could use something like a dowel or a Sharpie to wrap the paper around. So there's lots of low-cost options to get started if you don't want to commit to this right away. The next most important thing that you'll need is some sort of quilling paper. Now, quilling paper is a medium weight paper, so it's a little bit heavier than just the standard printer paper, but it's also lighter than the cardstock. Cardstock would be really hard to roll and to keep the shape with a quilling tool, so that medium weight is a good place between the two that's not too hard to roll, but that really keeps its shape well. So there's a bunch of different options for quilling paper. You can actually just buy pre-cut strips, or you could buy sheets and cut them yourself. And if you're cutting them yourself, it's nice to have something like this so that you can make sure you're getting straight lines, a paper cutter like this. But you could also do it with an X-Acto knife measuring along a ruler, for example. So these are some strips that I have pre-cut. And the most important thing to know about quilling strips is that the size of the coils or shapes that you're producing is going to be affected by two things, right? It's going to be affected by how long the strip is, so how long the strip is will dictate how big the shape is, but it's also going to tell you how tall it is. So this narrow strip here is going to make something that's much shorter than a larger strip. So as you're planning out what shapes you want to make and how you want them to look, just keep in mind that you may want a really narrow strip if you're trying to do these small flat shapes, or you may want a really big strip if you want these tall chunky shapes. And that's just something you'll get used to as you play around more with making your own shapes here. Some other things that are really helpful to have, so you will want some sort of glue for most of the shapes that we're making, just to glue the end of the strip of paper in place. This is just a simple white Elmer's glue here. It dries clear, and that's really the main thing you'd be looking for. For the most part, we're going to be hiding glue underneath our design, so you don't have to worry too much about it being seen. But something that dries clear is really what you're looking for, and that could be craft glue, it could be Elmer's school glue like this, it could be tacky glue, whatever you have on hand or are most comfortable with. And as you do more quilling, you'll probably end up with a favorite type of glue to work with. Something that's nice to have but not necessary for applying that glue is something like a toothpick. Of course, you can do it just with the tip of the glue or with your fingers, but a toothpick can be really good for getting into these small spaces that we're sometimes working with and making it easy to just apply the glue. So what I do is put some glue on this piece of cardboard and then use my toothpick to apply it to my quilled shapes here so that I don't have to worry about getting glue on my fingers or any of that. It's also nice to have a pair of scissors. We'll be tearing a lot of these strips to the size that we want because it's a little bit more subtle. It blends in more with the edge when you tear it. But there are times when you're going to want to cut this and have that sharp edge as well. So having a pair of scissors for that or to trim down any parts on your quilling paper can be a really helpful thing to have on hand. And then last but not least, you'll want something that you can use to eventually glue these onto. So like I said, there's a ton of different things you can do with quilling. What I have here is a little card, so if I wanted to do card making, I could glue my finished shapes onto the front in whatever design I'd come up with. But maybe you want to put them on a canvas, maybe you want to turn them into jewelry and you want to poke holes in them and string them on a necklace or something like that. Whatever it is that you have in mind for your design, you'll just want to have that material ready to go so that you can glue these in place or hang them once you're ready. And once you have all of these pieces, you're ready to get started. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the basics of quilling. So there are tons of different shapes and techniques that we can use for quilling. Today we're just going to talk about a few of the core building blocks of quilling, some shapes that will really help you build up a wide variety of different designs and give you a lot of options to get you started. So first I'm going to show you what the finished shape looks like, and then I'll go through what the process is to make it. The most basic shape, and the one that you'll see a lot of, is called a tight coil. Now a tight coil is very easy to make, and it's as simple as this. We're going to put the paper of our choice on our quilling tool. We're going to roll it all the way around until we reach the end of the strip, and then while it's still coiled tightly on there, we're just going to glue it in place and then slide that off. So it's really easy to make, and it's a very common shape and one that you'll want to use a lot. So I'm just going to tear this strip in half, and I'll show you how that looks. So what we'll do is we'll take the end of this strip, and we're going to go ahead and put it in between the slot of our slotted tool here. And I'm going to go ahead and keep it near the top, right, of my tool. I don't want to push it all the way down to the bottom, and I'm going to be using my fingers here to guide it. So once you're ready, you can decide whether you want to turn towards you or away from you based on your own comfort. There's no right or wrong way. And we're just going to go ahead and keep turning the tool while we're holding the paper with our fingers and keeping it even on there. And then when we reach the end of this strip, I'm going to take my glue and I'm going to go ahead and glue it in place. And I'm going to hold it here until it has dried. And that can take a couple minutes, so don't worry too much about that. Now you can see I had a very short piece of paper that was also kind of a medium thickness. So the result is I have this tall, small, tight coil here. And that's just how this particular piece of paper works. Depending on what I was using this for, maybe I wanted to make an even smaller one than that, maybe I wanted a really big tight coil, or maybe I wanted it to be shorter. So it's really easy to modify that. Once you get used to working with different sizes and lengths of paper, you'll have a good sense in your mind of what you need to use for the particular project you're working on. Now once this has dried, we're just going to go ahead and remove this. You can just sort of rotate the tool a little bit back and then pull it straight off. And there we have it, a tight coil. Now the next shape I'm going to teach you is a really easy one to make. It's very similar to what we just made, and it's the building block for a bunch of different shapes that you can use in your design. So it's a really important one to know. And that's the loose coil. A loose coil, as the name might suggest, is made almost exactly like a tight coil, except at the end, instead of just gluing it in place like we just did, we're going to take it off of our slotted tool without gluing it, let it loosen up, and then glue the end in place. And that's going to make a coil that has a bunch of space in between each layer. And we can kind of gauge for ourselves how much we want to let it uncoil, how much space we want in there, and then glue it when we get it to the right size for whatever we're working on. So let's go ahead and make that. So once again, we're going to take, here's the other half of that same strip that I used. We're going to go ahead and poke the end in our slotted tool, and then we're going to start coiling. And that's that same process, right? We're turning the tool and we're using our finger to guide this particular piece of paper and make sure that it stays taut and that it's actually not getting offset, so that it's an even top and bottom. Okay, so I've reached the end of my coil. Instead of gluing, I'm just going to go ahead and remove it. I'm going to set it down on the table, and I'm going to let it loosen up. And if I want to, I can kind of poke it a bit, I can move it around, I can adjust how much space there is between these different coils. And when I'm happy with how it looks, I'm going to do the same thing I did before, which is simply to take my toothpick or whatever you're using and apply glue to the end of the strip. And then I'm going to hold it in place until it dries. Now you don't need a ton of glue for this. In fact, if you put too much glue, it could make the paper soggy or warp it, right? So really just a small dab of glue, and then I'm going to hold it in place until it's dry. And once it's dry here, I'll talk to you a little bit about all the different things that we can do with this shape. Okay, so my loose coil has dried. So now we can see that this loose coil has all this space in it, right? That makes it really easy to shape into other quilled shapes. So let's say I wanted to make an oval instead of a circle. Well, it's really just as simple as pinching the two sides together and holding it there until it holds its shape. And then we'll have our oval shape that we can use in our design. But if I wanted it to be a teardrop shape instead, I could just pinch the top like this, and then we'll have the teardrop at the top and this round part at the bottom, right? And if I wanted it to be a petal, I could just tweak it to the side a little bit, and we'll get that nice petal shape out of it. If I wanted it to be a leaf, I might tweak the other end so it's got a point on there. Or I could make it into an eye, or I could make it into all sorts of different shapes. So loose coils are really awesome just for making into whatever other shapes you want to use in your design. And that's really a core building block of, these half moons, semicircles, all sorts of things that you might want to use. You'll start by making this loose coil, and then you'll pinch it into the shape you wanted. So that's a really important one to know. There's another very common thing you can do with the loose coil, and that's using a pin or a toothpick to grab the center of that coil and pull it to the side. And you can see it here, how we have, I did this before, and once I pulled the center to the side of this shape, I glued it in place so that it would hold that. And that was how I was able to make this, called an eccentric coil. And then you just glue the side that's going to be facing down, so it's not going to be visible to the viewer. And that way you can hold it in place and make it look very natural when you have it on display. Now the next piece I'm going to tell you about is even easier because it doesn't require any gluing at all, and it's called a scroll. So a scroll is really just an identical process to the loose coil that we made, except that you don't glue the end. And you can even kind of pull on the tail a little bit until you get it to the size you want. You could trim it down if you decide you want a smaller scroll than what you ended up making. but it's a very easy one to make, and these scrolls are very common in a lot of quilled patterns. There's tons of things you can do with these scrolls too, and they're very easy because, again, you don't need to worry about the glue. So you could do a scroll like this where you pinch it in half and you just do a scroll pointing off to either side so it makes this nice V or sprout shape. Or you can do what I did for this little heart design, and you can fold it in half and do two scrolls on either side and then glue them together so you get this pretty heart shape. So this is a very versatile process. Once you know that core of loose coil, tight coil, scroll, you can adapt that into a ton of different shapes and patterns and designs. Now the last thing I'm going to show you is just a really fun way to make flowers. So I have this flower that I made before, and you can do it by making either a tight coil or a loose coil, depending on how you want it to look. But it's a really simple and fun process. So I'm going to go ahead and tear one of these strips down so it's just the blue part of the paper. And then what you do is you cut a little bit off the front end of the paper to make the center of our flower. And then you cut a little fringe into the other thicker part of the paper, and those are going to be our petals. You can see how I'm doing it like this, so we've got that nice little fringe there. Now I've reached the edge of my design, and I'm going to use that exact same process, the same way that we made our coils before, where I'm going to put it in at the end of my quilling tool, my slotted tool here, and I'm going to roll it towards myself, so this really tight coil at the center is going to be the center of our flower, and then now I'm rolling all the petals right around it. And at this point I have a choice, right? I could glue it in place right here and get this really tiny delicate flower, or I could do a loose coil like I did with this one and let it open up a bit. I think I'm going to glue it in place here. So once again, when we're making the tight coil, we're going to leave it on here until it's dry. So we'll just hold it in place. And now we can go ahead and remove it. And for this one, it's as simple as opening up the petals with our fingers. So we'll just go around the outer layer first, opening it up, and then work our way in until we like how the petals look on our flower. And there we have it. There's our flower. So those are just some really fun techniques, and you can see already how just learning those three core different shapes, the loose coil, the tight coil, the loose scroll, can be adapted into a ton of different things. So I would really encourage you to experiment with these basic shapes, experiment with making them different sizes and heights, and then when you're feeling really comfortable with producing those, challenge yourself to make a simple pattern. Maybe you want to do a birthday card and you want to do loose coils for the balloons and then a scroll for the string coming off the balloon. Or maybe you want to make this kind of petal shape and use it as a flame on a candle. There's tons of different things that you can experiment with. So I would encourage you to get started, and if you end up making any cool designs that you want to share and you want to share them on social media, tag them #PPLD Take and Make. We would love to see what you make. Alright, the last thing I want to share with you are some great resources that you can use to keep quilling, to learn some more basic shapes, to learn some more advanced tools, and of course to have some projects you could get started with if you want to experiment a little bit with some pre-made designs. So the ones I'm going to recommend today can all be checked out from the Pikes Peak Library District. The first one is called Paper Crafts Workshop. It's by Marie Browning, and it has a bunch of paper crafts in it, not just quilling. But that's great because quilling works so well with other paper crafts. A lot of things you can do in scrapbooking or in other forms of card making really go well with quilling. This one really takes you through some of the basic supplies you might want to purchase. It has recommendations for different brands, and then it shows you some even more shapes and techniques that you can use, as well as a few sample patterns. Another great one that's a little bit more advanced is called The Art of Quilling Paper Jewelry. It was written by Anne Martin, and it has even more advanced techniques and ways to get some really intricate designs out of quilling that you could then convert into necklaces, earrings, brooches, all sorts of things. So once you get to that level where you're comfortable making these kind of basic shapes, this is a really cool book to check out that can take you kind of to that next level. And there's another book by Marie Browning called New Concepts in Paper Quilling that's entirely about quilling, and this is really great for taking you through the fundamentals and giving you some projects that are more specifically about card making. So if that's what you really enjoy, is that card making aspect of this, I would definitely check out New Concepts in Paper Quilling. This is a great one for exploring that. So I would encourage you to check out any of those books. We also have some ebooks available that you could check out on quilling, as well as some excellent magazines, and I've included links to all of those in our catalog down in the description of this video. So I really hope that you enjoyed exploring the basics of quilling with me today. Once you start, you'll realize it's so easy to pick up, and you don't need many supplies at all to get started. You can use a lot of things that are just around in your own home. And it's something that's you can make beautiful designs with, even with a very basic level of shapes. You don't need all these fancy tools and equipment to make something that looks really incredible. So I would encourage you to experiment with it, to explore, and to check out some of these resources if you want to learn more about quilling. Have a great day!